welcome back to a brand new video on the channel, guys. So what I have for you guys today is going to be my Championship Week 12 score predictions, and this weekend in the Championship, guys, we have another full fixture list to go ahead and predict this weekend. And unfortunately, after this week we have yet another international break, and I'm sure all you guys, you'll know my thoughts on international breaks by now. I'm not a fan of them, so we'll have to make the most out of this Championship weekend, but luckily for us, we've got some decent games going on. And as well as that, guys, we of course did have some midweek fixtures going on this week in the Championship. So what did you make of all of them? Let me know down below. My team, Preston, we played on Wednesday against Aston Villa, and it wasn't great, I'm not gonna lie. Villa were deserved winners of that match. Preston were far off the pace in it. But speaking of some of the midweek fixtures, actually, guys, I will include your comments on screen now. So if any of you guys did successfully manage to get any of your midweek score predictions correct, I will include your comment on screen now. So fair play to everyone who did get a midweek scoreline correct, as there were a couple pretty hard ones to predict in there. But fair play to everyone. Let's crack on with the games. So our first game we have to talk over is the game taking place tonight on Friday night, guys, between Wolves and Fulham. So two interesting teams coming up against each other in this one here today. On their day, they're both capable of playing some really enticing football, actually. I think that they do play with a sort of similar style to some extent, but Wolves certainly being more successful than Fulham so far this season. Fulham at the moment really not on a good run of form. They're actually without a win in their last 4 games, so to be going away to the league leaders in Wolves, it's not going to be an easy one for Fulham by any stretch of the imagination. Wolves, over the course of their last 6 or 7 games, on the whole, have been on a very impressive run of form lately. Of course, they did get that loss to QPR, but that seems to be an anomaly in what has been a pretty good month for Wolves recently, really. So in this one here today, I think Fulham could cause Wolves some problems, but overall, I think Wolves' quality will shine through in the end. So for this one, I will go with a 2-1 home victory for Wolves. Going forward, I feel like they'll cause the Fulham defence far too many problems to handle. So I'll go with 2-1 Wolves. FIFA same. 2-0 Wolves. And our next game to go ahead and talk over is the early kickoff on Saturday between Bristol City and Cardiff. And this could go ahead and be the game of the weekend, actually. This is one that I'm really looking forward to seeing the outcome of. It's second in the table, coming up against 4th in the table, and it is a pretty hard one to predict, in my opinion. Bristol City, for a lot of their games this season, have just been freely scoring, so that's going to be an interesting style to combat against Cardiff, who defensively have been pretty resilient so far. You know, that classic Neil Warnock side, they've made themselves very hard to beat, and that's why they find themselves second in the table at the moment. But I just get a feeling with Bristol City playing at home especially, I know they did get that result against Leeds where they weren't at their best and they lost that game 3-0, but even so, I get a feeling Bristol City may do it in this one, so I'm going to go with a high scoring 3-2 victory for Bristol City. Cardiff, fair play if they do manage to get something for this, because they've still been hit with quite a few injuries, I think, going into this one here today. But I'll go with 3-2 Bristol City. FIFA saying a 1-0 Cardiff. Then for our next game, we then have Aston Villa, who are coming up against Sheffield Wednesday. So perhaps a game where at the start of the season you would be anticipating both of these sides to be in and around the top of the Championship come the end of the season. And in fairness to Aston Villa, they have done that so far. You know, they've been on quite an impressive run of form recently. Of course, they got that victory over my club Preston in midweek, where it was a pretty complete performance. I've got to be honest, you know, they had a couple injuries going into that game, but nevertheless, defensively they were absolutely sound in that game. They never looked like conceding, and going forward they did cause quite a few threats. And coming up against this Sheffield Wednesday side, who I'm still undecided about what I think of them and their prospects for the rest of the season, because of course in midweek, in fairness to them, they did pick up a victory against Millwall, but before that they really weren't on a good run of form. So this could be a time now for Wednesday to start building a little bit of momentum, but with how well Villa played in midweek, I think this may be another victory for them. So I'll go with a 2-1 home victory for Aston Villa in this one, whereas FIFA saying it'll be a 1-0 Wednesday. Then our next game sees Barnsley go ahead and come up against Birmingham. So quite a big game actually in and around the lower region of the Championship, this one of course. Birmingham recently not been on a brilliant run of form. I don't think Steve Cottrell's really had their the positive effect, like I know a lot of Birmingham fans, the instant impact, which I know a lot of Birmingham fans wanted him to have after Harry Redknapp was sacked. They've not been on a brilliant run of form recently. Of course, they lost in midweek to the hands of Brentford, and Barnsley have been a fairly inconsistent side so far this season, but one thing I will say about Barnsley is they have been scoring some outrageous goals recently, so goals is certainly something they're not short of at the moment. So coming up against this Birmingham side, who I think I still pose quite a few questions at them, I'm going to go with a 2-1 home victory for Barnsley in this one. I think Birmingham still have got a little bit more to show if they are going to really steer themselves clear of relegation. So I'll say 2-1 Barnsley, FIFA same, 1-0 Birmingham. And then our next game sees bottom of the table Bolton come up against Norwich City. So quite an intriguing encounter this one to go ahead and predict. Of course, Bolton have actually drawn their last 3 games now. So despite them being unbeaten in 4 games and on a pretty nice run of form really for Bolton, they need to start turning those draws into victories if they are going to climb off the bottom of the table and steer clear of relegation. Coming up against this Norwich side who in their last 2 games have suffered 2 defeats, so they'll be looking to bounce back to what was a pretty impressive run of form before those 2 defeats prior to that. So for this one here today, I've got the impression that it could go down a similar pattern to some of Bolton's other games, of course. In that game they had against Sunderland in midweek, they scored 3 goals. Norwich have a much more sturdier defence than Sunderland, so they'll be a lot harder to break down in my opinion. But even so, for this one, I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw for this one. I think it will be another draw for Bolton. Whereas FIFA saying it'll be a 1-0 away win. And our next game sees Derby County come up against Reading. So of course, Derby, it is very hard to look past them at the moment. And just looking at their form at this point in time, it really is something. You know, they've gone ahead and won their last 4 games in the Championship, and overall they're putting in some very decent performances at the moment, so it's going to be hard for me to look past a Derby victory for this game. But I'd be foolish to rule out Reading for this one. Of course, this season on the whole they've not been very good, I'm just going to go ahead and say that. However, the game they had in midweek against Nottingham Forest was arguably their best performance of the season, which saw them get that 3-1 victory. So Reading, will that just be a flash in the pan, or will they be building a little bit of momentum? It's hard to say at this point in time, but even so, with how well Derby have been playing at the moment, I'm going to go for a 2-0 home victory for them. Fair play for Reading, prove me wrong. FIFA same, a 0-0. And our next game sees Ipswich Town come up against my club, Preston North End. And for this one, from a Preston fan's perspective, I'm not very confident getting into this one. Preston's form recently has just taken an absolute nosedive as to how we were going at the start of the season, which is a little bit disheartening for me, I'm not going to lie. But even so, there are quite a few contributing factors as to why that is the case, of course. We're actually missing, I think, 8 of our senior defenders are injured going into this game, so it's not looking brilliant for us. I mean, in the game in midweek against Aston Villa, we ended up playing a 5'9" central midfielder in Alan Brown at centre-back. So that's a little bit of cause for concern with our defensive issues. Ipswich themselves haven't been on a brilliant run of form recently, actually. Going forward, they've been lacking a little bit of punch going forward, I've thought, recently. So maybe 2 sides coming up against each other, not with the biggest of confidences. But even so, I just don't have a good feeling for this one, and I am going to go for a 2-1 home victory for Ipswich. I feel like our defence may just be a little bit too weak for this one yet again, so I'll say 2-1 Ipswich, FIFA saying 1-0 Ipswich. And our next game sees Millwall come up against Burton Albion. So of course, Burton Albion currently find themselves in the bottom 3 in the Championship, and their recent form really isn't looking great for them. I mean, Burton Albion are a really tricky side to predict so far this season, because they've had some games where they've been really high scoring games, like the game in midweek against Barnsley where that ended 4-2, and they've had other games which they managed to go ahead and grind out a gritty 0-0. So it's hard to define, it's hard to distinguish with Burton as to what side's going to turn up for them. Millwall this season I've been very impressed by, especially their home form. I think they will cause Burton quite a few problems going forward. So for this one, I'm going to go for a 3-1 home victory for Millwall. Burton, they need to start picking up some points now. Will this be the game to do it? I'm not so sure. And our next game sees Nottingham Forest go up against Queen's Park Rangers, and a tricky game to go ahead and predict this one. Over the whole season, Nottingham Forest have been another one of those sides which are a real tough one to predict because they've been really topsy-turvy with how they turn up to games. Of course, they lost that game in midweek to Reading, which I thought they'd have been quite disappointed with actually. Coming up against this QPR side who are in a really good run of form recently actually. They've beaten both the teams who have been top of the table recently in both Wolves and Sheffield United in their recent 2 home games. One thing that does have to be said about QPR is they don't have a brilliant away record. I believe they're still yet to win on the road actually, so that has to have some favour for Nottingham Forest in this game here today. But even so, I think quite a few goals could be scored in this one, and I'm going to go for a 2-2 draw for this one. And so I feel like these two could cancel each other out in this one, whereas FIFA's saying it'll be 1-0 Forest. Then our next game sees Sheffield United go up against Hull City. So of course, last season Sheffield United being in League One and Hull being in the Premier League, it has been a really topsy-turvy season as to where these two sides now find each other. Of course, Sheffield United currently 3rd at the table and Hull linger in the lower parts of mid-table. So for this game, both of them are coming off the back of a loss in their last game, so both of them are going to want to be putting that behind them as soon as possible. Sheffield United's home form this season has been pretty spectacular, so it is going to take some team really to go ahead and start to dismantle that. Do I see Hull being that side? I'm not so sure. They could cause them a couple problems going forward, you know, with some of their flair players at the moment, like Jared Bowen seems to be in a nice run of form. He's capable of sparking up something going forward, but defensively with Hull, I'm still not convinced by them, and I think that Sheffield United will cause them quite a few problems in those areas. So for that reason, I'm going to go for a 2-1 home victory for Sheffield United, whereas FIFA's going to back a 1-0 away victory. And then to the evening kickoff on Saturday, that is the game between Brentford and Leeds United. So this is one which I'm really looking forward to watching actually, as quite a lot is riding on this game at the moment. Leeds fans, I'd be very interested to know what your opinions are on your current manager. I've seen a lot of mixed reviews about what the Leeds fans are currently thinking around the managerial situation at the moment, and of course recently they have dropped out of the playoffs with what has been a pretty shoddy run of form recently. I believe they've only got 1 victory in their last 5 league games, so not on a brilliant run at the moment, especially when you compare it to Brentford, who I believe they're unbeaten in their last 6 or 7 games at the moment and really are putting teams to the sword at the moment, like we really thought they would be at the start of the season. So for this one, recently Brentford have been scoring a lot of goals, and with Leeds looking a bit suspect defensively at the moment, I feel like a similar pattern could occur in this game here today. So I'm going to go for a big scoring 3-2 home victory for Brentford. I really do feel like with their form at the moment, they really are pushing up the league at the moment, and they'll cause Leeds a lot of problems. So I'll say 3-2 Brentford. FIFA's going for a 1-0 Leeds. And our last game to go ahead and talk over, guys, is the game taking place on Sunday, and this is a pretty massive game actually for both teams really, but especially for Sunderland. We of course have the derby going on between Middlesbrough and Sunderland, and of course with Simon Grayson recently being sacked by Sunderland, how the team is going to shape up and what the lineup's going to be for this one, whether their caretaker manager is going to change it around a bit, I'm not so sure, and it is a tough one to predict for this one, as of course it's been pretty well known. Sunderland at the moment have been on a ridiculously bad run of form. I believe they're on the longest winless streak in the entirety of the Football League, which really does say something. And they're coming up against this Middlesbrough side who in their last 2 games have been looking pretty convincing. I think that's fair to say. I'm going to go for a 3-1 home victory for Middlesbrough in this one. I just feel like going forward with players like Assombalonga, Braithwaite and other players charging forward, they'll have too much for Sunderland. So I'll say 3-1, FIFA same, 2-0. So there you guys have it. That will wrap it up for this episode of my championship score predictions. So as always guys, I am very interested to hear what your score predictions are in the comments down below. So as always guys, I will leave all the fixtures that are taking place in the comments down below so you guys can easily go ahead and make your predictions. But apart from that guys, that will now wrap it up for this video. So if you have enjoyed, make sure you do leave a like. It is always massively appreciated, and make sure you check out all the other links in the description down below, and make sure you subscribe for regular championship content. But apart from that guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.